So most of the people that I was going to thank have been thanked already, so I have a little extra time. Jim Benneman, great job. I know that SIGEPs everywhere and members of your department are very proud. I know they're very surprised as well, but they're very proud. Matt Helmer, you and your team, as always, a great event. And let's give another round of applause to the servers and the staff here at the Hyatt. So for those of you who have endured my speeches before, you know that I have a tendency to be fascinated with where words came from. I think in part that's pragmatic. As one traces the etymology of words, you can come across interesting connections to modern words that allow you sometimes to do a little wordplay, something like that you can build a speech on. The theme tonight is the word spark. Now, spark first arrives in relatively modern languages over 1,000 years ago in the Old English, where it meant a fiery particle. And of course, the roots of the word fire are even more ancient. In fact, there are several words in modern languages that describe fire. But there's one in particular from Proto-Germanic languages that traces itself, interestingly, to two Latin roots. The root pewer, which is an inanimate noun that meant fire as a thing, fire as a substance. And it eventually evolved into words like pyre. And then an animate noun that eventually completed its evolution into a verb, egni, which eventually became words like ignite. And egni is an interesting word in that it means fire as a living force. Now I'm going to talk about pewer and egni tonight as I talk about Colorado State University. And I'm going to start with pewer. This would be how we would describe your alma mater as it exists today, the university as it stands now. Now, those of you who have been at my speeches before at the Green and Gold Gala know that I typically have a list of things that I want to brag about, and we have the list. We are building on 6 consecutive years of record enrollment at this university, but next fall's entering class looks to be something truly special. By all accounts, it will be the largest, the most diverse, and the most academically qualified class in the history of Colorado State University. More Coloradoans will continue to attend CSU than any other institution. At this point, we've already set records in the number of applications received at the university, the number of out-of-state applications. 26% of the students that we've admitted are diverse applicants. It is an amazing, amazing class. Once those students arrive at CSU, we're doing good things. We've seen the single largest retention rate in the history of the university. Our graduation rates are on the rise. And after those students graduate, then good things really start to happen. 81% of CSU graduates have employment in their field of choice within 6 months after graduation. That's 10% higher than the national average. These students' starting pay is slightly higher than the national average. Their debt as they graduate is slightly lower than the national average. Their default rates are among the lowest in the country. We have been able to maintain our first generation and low-income access as a university, in part because of the leadership of Governor John Hickenlooper's administration and our elected officials in the General Assembly, who in the last 2 years have restored much of the funding that was lost during the Great Recession. But we've also had great progress through our own innovative programs like the Commitment to Colorado, which was designed 6 years ago in collaboration with my friend and colleague, our Chancellor Emeritus Joe Blake, who's here this evening. We have added in the past year more Colorado State University faculty members to the National Academy than we had in the previous 20. And we maintained our position as the #2 university in the country in terms of federal funding per faculty member among universities without a medical school. I think Alan Rudolph, our Vice President for Research, is here this evening. He and Rick Miranda, our Provost and Executive Vice President, I think deserve a big round of applause for that effort. Once again this year, we're on track to set a record in private fundraising, beating even last year's record, where private funds exceeded the amount received from the state of Colorado by over $46 million. This will be our fourth consecutive year above $100 million, the fourth consecutive year that private fundraising exceeded that of public funds, and this year we will exceed $150 million. Brett Anderson, you should stand and take a bow. Kim Tobin, well done as well. We have been building a campus designed to serve future generations. We have added 1.3 million new gross square feet of space to the campus, 2/3 of it directly related to academic instruction. Steve Holton, our Executive Director of Facilities, and Amy Parsons, our Vice President for University Operations, deserve a big round of applause for their efforts in that area. We were named the University of the Year by the National Hispanic Institute. We received the highest diversity award given by the NCAA, and if Mary Ontiveros and Albert Bimper were here this evening, we'd ask them to stand, but let's give them a round of applause anyway. We have improved 9 slots in the U.S. News and World Report rankings in just the last 2 years, and once again, we're ranked as the top school in the country in terms of sustainability and the environment, being the first school in the country to ever attain a platinum rating in the STAR system. And while many people are involved in that effort, again, Amy Parsons, who oversees our facilities operations, and Tom Milligan, whose external relations group tells the story of CSU, have been doing great work. Now, across the state and across the world, CSU has been changing lives. Within our state, our Vice President for Engagement, Lou Swanson, and Cathay Reynolds, his number 2 person, who are both here this evening, play a great role. And Jim Cooney, our Vice Provost for International Affairs, who's not here, I think they deserve a round of applause as well. And in Ram Athletics, we're winning. If you look at football, volleyball, and men's and women's basketball this past year, the highest winning percentage of any Division I school was Colorado State University. Our new athletic director, Joe Parker, and his wife, Jen, are here with us this evening, and when this speech ends, if it ever ends, I know you'll make them welcome as new members of the Colorado State University community. Welcome, Joe and Jen. Now, all of these things are possible because the university has an exceptional financial foundation on which we can rest all of these efforts. That's led by our campus CFO, Lynn Johnson, along with our partners at the Colorado State University Foundation. The CEO, Kathleen Henry, and the CFO, Karen Dunbar, are here tonight. And I think we also ought to acknowledge Rich Schweigert, our system CFO. Let's give all 4 of them a round of applause. And of all these statistics, perhaps the one that I'm most proud of is the one I'll close with. 92% of CSU graduates would attend CSU again. So these statistics are all the payword, the description of the university as it exists today. But they're not the EGNY. They are not the living force of this university. That living force is and has always been and will always be people. People like the folks we just named and all of their colleagues that they represent. People like the scholarship recipients, people like Emel. People like other scholarship recipients of ours, many of whom go into teaching. We have many teachers, some at our School of Education, some teaching English as a second language to low-income, high-risk inner-city kids. But whatever they're teaching and wherever they're teaching it, they're making the most of the scholarships that you gave them. They're making the most of that opportunity, and they're using their stories to inspire their students each and every day. That is part of the agni, the living fire, the spark of this institution, and you've made that all possible. Please give yourselves a round of applause. So again, for those of you who have heard a couple of my speeches, you know that I usually also introduce the element of time, not in the sense of duration, although that usually happens to me, but time as, thank you, at least someone laughed at that. It's an awkward moment. Time is a force. I think that time is one of the most powerful forces in our world. It grinds relentlessly against accomplishment and failure alike, and as a result, it can be a powerful ingredient in a salve to heal, and it will erode even the greatest human accomplishment. Time takes its derivation, very interestingly to me, from a word that meant to cut up or to divide. And about 6 centuries ago, a new definition of time appeared within our modern languages, and that was a definition very paradoxical to cut up or to divide. It was a definition about a continuous, indefinite duration. And I think when you combine these two definitions, you see an interesting mental picture. You see time as a river running through the landscape of our lives, the landscape of our history. And think of it as a river cutting through that landscape, a river carving a canyon. And you see where we are today being constantly changed by this factor of time. I think time is a very useful factor to apply to decisions. At the university, we try and take that longer-term lens and ask ourselves, what decisions are we making that will build things that last? And what issues are we wrestling with that will simply be gone tomorrow? I think what I wanted to do with the rest of this speech was to take this concept of time, which I think is such an important lens, and apply it to this concept of the spark or fire. So if you'll bear with me, let's float back a bit along, if you'll follow this analogy while I beat it to death, a river of time. 25 years ago this year, a man named Nelson Mandela was released after 27 and a half years in a South African prison. The spark that was his life combined with freedom to create a flame that burned out the system of apartheid. If we went back another 25 years, 50 years ago, we would be with Dr. Martin Luther King and 2,600 compatriots as they marched in Selma, setting off another spark in the fire of the civil rights movement that accomplished so much, but yet we know still has work to do as we watch fires of a very different type burn this week in Baltimore. If we went back another 50 years, 100 years ago, we'd have been with a man named Edward Stone as he died in the fields of France, the first U.S. soldier ever killed in World War I. The sparks from that war lay as embers for nearly 2 decades before they exploded into the flame that was World War II and caused a young Colorado A&M football player named John Mosley to leave his teammates and fly with the Tuskegee Airmen in a war that has changed and shaped the world in which we live. And if we were to go back 150 years, we would stand with Abraham Lincoln, the man who signed the Morrill Act that created land-grant universities like Colorado State, at his second inaugural address, only to know that he would be assassinated 72 days later. Now, land-grant universities, the concept that anyone with the talent and the motivation to earn a degree should have that opportunity at a world-class university, and that if all of us invest in those people, it will benefit all of us in return. That concept was one of the brightest sparks thrown off by the Agni, the living fire of Abraham Lincoln. It lit its own fire that has burned brightly for over 150 years, and I believe at places like Colorado State, it will burn for the next century and a half. Now, if we were back at Lincoln's second inaugural, I think it was an absolute masterpiece. It's a very short speech. It's 4 paragraphs, 702 words. It took him about 5.5 minutes to deliver. Contrast, for example, this speech. Maybe best not to dwell on that. The first two paragraphs of that speech are very short setup paragraphs. The real meat of the speech is all in the third paragraph. And in that paragraph, Lincoln deals with how one can reconcile the concept of God against the concept of this bloody Civil War. In his early writings and speeches, Lincoln didn't speak much about religion, but as the war drew on, he spoke more about God. And the last two sentences of that final third paragraph are incredibly famous, and many of you may have heard them. I'd like to quote, "Fondly do we hope, fervently do we pray, that this mighty scourge of war may speedily pass away. Yet, if God wills that it continue until all the wealth piled by the bondsman's 250 years of unrequited toils shall be sunk, and until every drop of blood drawn with the lash shall be paid by another drawn with the sword, as was said 3,000 years ago, so still it must be said, the judgments of the Lord are true and righteous altogether." Now, that has nothing to do with my speech, but that just flows like poetry, and I've always wanted to read it. What I actually wanted to talk about was the fourth paragraph. And the fourth paragraph, mercifully for you all, is very short. It's one sentence. But it's a wonderful sentence. It paints a poignant picture of a future that Lincoln envisioned after the war. With malice toward none, with charity for all, with firmness in the right as God gives us to see the right, let us strive to finish the work we are in, to bind up the nation's wounds, to care for him who shall have borne the battle, and for his widow, and for his orphan, to do all which may achieve and cherish a joint and lasting peace among ourselves and with all nations. Lincoln, you see, had this uncanny ability to see through the flames of that bloody Civil War and envision a future that other eyes couldn't see. It wasn't that he was immune to the flames or insensitive to the cries that reached his ears. Far from it. It's just that he could see a different type of fire. Fires of hope in a darkened world that lit the path to a brighter future. And that's the concept that I want to close with tonight. Each of us can become engulfed in the fires of our day. The crises, both real and alleged, that threaten to drain our energy, to demand our attention, to distract our focus. And yet each of us also has the ability to look up, to see through those flames, and to see a tomorrow that is better than today. Each of us has the ability, in big ways and in small ways, not less important ways, to give off sparks that can become fires that light that path for those who follow. Each of you as alumni are the Agni, the living fire of Colorado State University. You began as sparks given off from her fire, but you have become fires of your own, giving off your own sparks in the form of these scholarships that allow students like Emil to go on, to contribute, to become their own fire and light that path to the future. I stand here before you humbled by your generosity in investing in these students. I stand here before you hoping fervently, as Lincoln might have said, that you are proud of your alma mater. And I stand here before you proud, indeed privileged, to serve you all as the president of a great American university, Colorado State University. Thank you all.